Welcome to Greybeard Philosophy, bringing ancient wisdom and daily practice to the inner life and the wildernesses we journey, one practice at a time. I'm Brian Windsor, and today we continue the Modern Wilderness Conditions series. You know, the shifting weather of liquid modernity, the distraction and capture of mosquitoes and lures, and now finally, the two hungers. Part 1, the hunger for applause. This reflection began long before leaving for this short backpacking trek. What I thought would be a short shakedown hike turned into a valuable lesson taught by heat and humidity, thunder, a flooded tent, and the honest condition of my body. I wrote this in my journal before leaving. The trail doesn't validate your parking or your ego. It only asks what you are carrying right now. I couldn't fully understand how quickly the trail would test it. I had planned a 3-day, 30-mile trek through the big Sipsey Loop in Alabama with Carleigh, my faithful dog and trail companion. I hadn't been out for many months, perhaps years, in any serious backpacking sense, and I knew the trip would test more than legs. It would test motive. Before I even left home, I could feel the old machinery starting up inside of me. Instead of simply loading the pack and leaving, I busied myself with unnecessary tasks. I even found myself preparing sweet potato slips in water for planting when I returned, as though the garden suddenly required attention right then. But beneath that activity was something else. Nervousness. Not just nervousness about heat and humidity and distance and water, terrain, or weather. Something more interior, a quiet dread that the trail might find me out. What if I wasn't as seasoned as I had portrayed myself to others? What if the image of backpacker and veteran outdoorsman and disciplined old trail man was stronger than the current reality? What if I could no longer do what I thought I could do? What if I was exposed as a backpacking fraud? That's how the validation treadmill works. It doesn't always begin with applause. Sometimes it begins with the fear of losing applause. As I prepared to leave, I thought of people my age traveling comfortably in RVs and moving through the country with air conditioning and soft beds, refrigeration, and easy stopping points. And there I was, loading a pack, taking Carleigh, and driving toward a wilderness where I knew I would suffer. Why? That was the question I could not avoid. Was I going because I loved the wilderness? Was I going because solitude and trail, dog, creek, and silence still called as something true in me? Was I going because I needed the pressure of the trail to reveal what office life had hidden? Or was I trying to prove something to myself, to my wife, to my grown children, and especially my son Danny, to my imagined readers and listeners, to some invisible audience still seated in the theater of my mind? If the only why behind the hike was the witness of having done it, then the trek would become miserable even before I stepped onto the trail. That was the first lesson. The validation treadmill isn't merely the hunger to be praised after the deed. It's the corruption of motive before the deed is even done. Epictetus understood this with severe clarity. He chided those who spoke and read and served and disputed, not for the sake of truth or usefulness, but for the admiration that might follow. His question cuts through pretense. Would you be useful or be praised? That question belongs at the trailhead. Would you walk the loop or be known as the man who walked the loop? Would you write the lesson or be admired for having written it? Would you do the deed or use the deed to feed old hunger? Would you serve or be seen serving? Would you endure or be applauded for endurance? This is where motive becomes a base camp issue. Base camp's the self, the inner place where attention, desire, judgment, conscience, and will are formed. If base camp is cluttered with a need to be admired, even good deeds begin to rot from within. The outward act may still look noble. A person still may hike and teach and lead and give and serve and write and preach or sacrifice. But if praise is the hidden wage being sought, then the deed has already begun to sour. Jesus of Nazareth warned of this same danger in the Sermon on the Mount. He spoke of those who gave alms to be seen by others. He said, "Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them. When thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do, that they might have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward." The deed of almsgiving was outwardly generous, but the motive had become theater. The point was not that generosity is wrong or that all public good must be hidden. The warning was sharper. If praise is the reward you seek, praise is the reward you receive. The transaction is complete. The deed's been spent. That is the danger of doing good work for the wrong witness. Before stepping onto the Sipsey Trail, I entered base camp the best I could. I paused at the threshold. I tried to quiet the old executive habit energy and reminded myself, I've arrived at the trailhead. I don't need this hike to prove anything. Then I breathed. Breathing in, I am calm. Breathing out, I am restful. I stood there for 5 breaths. Breathing in, I am calm. Breathing out, I am restful. Then I asked, what am I carrying besides gear? That question stayed with me as I walked. I was carrying a pack and water, food, shelter, and the ordinary tools of backpacking. Carleigh had her own backpack of food and her favorite stuffy. But I was also carrying identity. I was carrying old titles. I was carrying credentials. I was carrying that remembered self. I was carrying the subtle wish to still be impressive. Carleigh was carrying a sense of purpose, relationship, and presence. That day was the first day in nearly 30 years that I was not the leader of or inside of an organization. I wasn't leader of a school, not a business, not a religious role, not a formal structure requiring me to carry responsibility in a visible way. Since about 2001, I've been aware of the toxic pull of flattery and external validation, though I didn't yet have the language to call it the validation treadmill. Now I was approaching the trailhead with Carleigh, and no one around to flatter me, encourage me, admire my gear, praise my preparedness, or tell me I was doing something impressive. And I could feel something cleansing in that absence. Perhaps that was the pressure I needed from the trail. Perhaps that's part of why Siddhartha Gautama left the palace and eventually became Buddha, the awakened one. The palace couldn't answer the deepest questions because the palace was full of mirrors. Status, pleasure, protection, inheritance, and admiration surrounded him. But they couldn't free him from suffering in old age and sickness or death. So he stepped away from the platform, not to build a better platform, not to be admired for renunciation, not to be seen as spiritual. He stepped into wilderness because the question was real. That's the kind of motive I wanted. But the old self doesn't disappear just because you enter the woods. It travels with you as unseen baggage. You see, I was wearing a hat that identified me as a veteran. I'd pinned my jump wings to my backpack where I could see them each time I lifted it onto my shoulders. And that forced an honest question. Is this just another element of my own validation treadmill? Was some part of me hoping someone would notice and ask so I could bear witness to having served, having been airborne qualified, having trained with special forces? Then I passed a big giant oak tree. It had no plaque. No sign announced that it had weathered storms longer than I had been alive. No passerby had to be instructed to admire it. It was simply there, rooted, quiet, massive, and true. The trailhead was the same. It didn't ask to review my qualifications. It didn't care that I was a disabled Army veteran, and it didn't honor my service more than it honored someone who had never worn a uniform. It didn't ask for my curriculum vitae. It didn't care that I had a PhD in education and organizational leadership. It didn't care that I'd founded a school, led organizations, or carried responsibilities for decades. The trail made no announcement. The trees, the river, the waterfalls, the mud, the heat, the hills were indifferent to my past. That indifference isn't cruel. It was cleansing. It revealed how much of the self can become accustomed to being recognized, introduced, validated, or explained. Now, credentials can matter in a proper place. A PhD matters in my former professional work. Airborne qualification matters in the military. Experience matters when experience is put into service. But credentials don't climb switchbacks. The validation treadmill won't carry a pack up a hot, humid trail. It won't filter water, regulate body temperature, steady the mind, calm the breath, or make a wise decision under pressure. It can't prepare the body for hard miles. It can only decorate the ego before the trail tells the truth. My mother used to say, "Brian, your trumpet sounds a lot louder if you let other people blow it." I've tried to live that way. I've tried not to elevate myself. I've tried to elevate the schools I led or the schools I founded, the projects entrusted to me. But man, even there, the motive needs examination. Sometimes we don't seek direct elevation. We seek vicarious elevation. We let the organization, the project, the team, or the mission become the lens through which we still hope to be admired. That's another form of the treadmill. The trail offers a different kind of elevation. It isn't the hollow elevation of self-trumpeted greatness or the borrowed height of other people's opinions. It is the slow uphill trudge that cannot be faked by shouted accolades. It's earned step by step, breath by breath, and sometimes by the humility to stop. Less than a mile into the trek, I began to feel lighter. There were no exterior expectations. Carleigh didn't admire me. She simply wanted to be with me. There are no adulations, no social obligations, no worries about pleasing or offending anyone. There was only the trail, the green world, the sound of birds, and the presence of a loyal dog. For a while, I felt the executive life fall away. But not entirely. I kept checking my navigation map, the app on my wrist. Not because I needed a bearing, but because I wanted to check pace and distance. I wanted data to reassure me that I was progressing, that I was still doing fine, that I was still winning. That was another revelation. Data can become its own treadmill. Now, numbers can become a substitute for presence. Miles per hour, distance completed, elevation gained, time elapsed, steps counted, calories burned, messages answered, analytics reviewed, open rates measured, engagement tracked. All of them can be useful tools, but a tool becomes dangerous when the soul asks it to provide validation. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, Carleigh and I had covered 4 miles in about 2 hours, and I was already exhausted. The heat was heavy. My eyes stung with sweat. There was no breeze. My hat, shirt, pants, socks, boots were soaked. A severe heat warning was in effect for that day and the days ahead. I had known this before beginning the trek. So the question again, why am I doing this? Could the pressure of the trail squeeze out the remaining executive habit energy? Yes, perhaps, but why this pressure? Why not a fishing trip? Why not something easier? I thought again of Siddhartha. Why leave the palace? Why go into wilderness? Why not seek peace without exposure? Perhaps because some truths only become visible when the validating structures are removed. Then the harder question came. Should I turn back? I wanted to continue, but I also knew that part of the desire to continue was not courage, it was fear. fear of failure, fear of the opposite of flattery, fear of the quiet admission that I could not complete what I had planned. That's the underside of the validation treadmill. It isn't only the hunger for applause, it's the fear of humiliation, the fear of being seen as less, the fear of discovering that the remembered self is stronger than the actual self. The old ego would have driven on, but heat doesn't negotiate with ego. So Carleigh and I, we took our packs off, our boots off. My boots off, we sat in the shade. See, I've learned that it's best not to make a decision at the height of pressure. Pressure narrows vision. Heat, hunger, fatigue, and fear distort judgment. So I stopped. I practiced some shamatha. I let the breath calm the body and the mind. I tried to stop the habit energy of complaint. The sweat in my eyes, the runny nose, the heat, the frustration, the inner grumbling. Stop. Calm. Rest. Heal. As I settled, the clearing changed, or rather, I changed enough to see it. The sun illuminated the canopy into a beautiful green. The air was still, but the creek was alive. Birds moved and called through the trees. What at first felt like a place to collapse became a place to return. That was base camp. Not a campsite, not a destination. A restored inner space where I could see clearly enough to choose. We rested for a while, then we walked again. By 3 p.m., we'd gone 6 miles. The heat was becoming dangerous, and I could hear thunder approaching. I found a good camping spot, quickly set up the tent. Carleigh and I went down to the creek to wash and filter water. Suddenly, the storm was upon us. I whistled for her, and she scrambled up the bank with me. I actually slid down and got my pants muddy, and we barely made it into the tent before the sky opened with a crash of thunder and a downpour of rain. I hadn't set anything up inside for the night. Within minutes, the bottom of the tent was a splashy pool of water. I'd already taken off my shirt and pants, so I just laid down in the water and felt it cool my overheated back. Then I just laughed out loud. What am I doing here? The question was absurd and honest. There I was, a man who had spent decades leading organizations, lying in a puddle of rainwater in a tent in the Sipsey Wilderness with a wet dog curled up at my feet. No applause, no proof, no polished image, no data point could make the moment more respectable. And strangely, I was free. I lay there and listened. Thunder like concussion and rain like percussion on the tent. Carleigh breathing at the foot. The storm moving over and through. When the rain lessened, I inflated my sleeping pad and found my pillow. Thankfully, it was still dry and continued lying there, soaked and quiet. There was no way to measure that moment. No one could see it. No one could praise it. No one could misunderstand it. No one can turn it into status. It simply was. And because it couldn't be converted into applause, it became clean. That may have been the purest moment of the trek. Later, when the thunder moved off into a distant rumble and the birds began chirping and whistling loudly announcing that the storm had passed, I changed into dry clothes and hung the wet ones outside, hoping that they might dry before morning. Oh, they didn't. The campsite was intensely beautiful. Lying in that water had tempted me for a moment, just to pack up and walk out. But instead, I stayed present. I noticed the cool water on my back, the sound of the storm, the companionship of Carleigh, and the strange mercy of not needing the moment to become anything else. That night, I wrote that perhaps the lesson was this: formation over performance. The Sipsey Wilderness was not formed by sudden force, but by long erosion. Water, resistance, time, descent, flow. The canyon didn't perform itself into being. It was formed through repetition. Perhaps I'm seeking something similar, not performance, formation. Perhaps, generations from now, someone may walk past the formation of my life and find shade, courage, or instruction. I may not be there to see it. I may not know whether it mattered. And that is as it should be. An old Greek proverb says that a society grows great when old men plant trees under whose shade they don't expect to sit. That is a clean image of legacy. No applause now, shade later. The next morning, the trail told the truth again. The heat and humidity were already oppressive. Within minutes of packing, I was drenched with sweat. My body knew what my ego resisted. It was time to turn back. The original plan had been 30 miles, but 6 miles had taught the lesson. That sentence was hard to accept. The validation treadmill can kill you if you stay on it too long. The ego would have driven on. The fear of failure would have kept moving. The imagined witness would have demanded completion. But the trail was not asking me to prove the old self. It was asking me to walk truthfully in the present body, under present conditions, with present wisdom. So we turned back. That decision may have been the cleanest deed of the trek. Not because it was impressive. It was not. It was clean because it obeyed reality rather than image. When Carleigh and I finally reached the truck, I was exhausted, soaked from hat to boots, and covered in mud from slipping down a creek bank. I felt faint. I needed water and air conditioning. There were a bunch of day hikers in the parking lot, and some children called out about the cute dog with the backpack. I barely acknowledged him. There was no performance left. I opened the truck door, and I stood on my little sitting pad, and I stripped down to my wet underwear and rummaged through my pack and found my dry sleeping clothes. And I changed right there. I don't think anyone paid much attention. That too was freeing. There are moments when dignity isn't looking impressive. Dignity is simply doing the next necessary thing without turning it into a story. Carleigh, as usual, was one of my best teachers. Throughout the hike, she walked ahead of me. But every so often, she stopped and turned and looked back to make sure I was still there. She wasn't looking for praise. She wasn't performing loyalty. She wasn't asking whether she looked impressive carrying her pack. She was simply staying in the relationship. See, Carleigh doesn't need me to be impressive. She needs me to be present. And that's a better standard than applause. This matters because the hunger for validation isn't just a modern digital problem. It's an ancient human vulnerability made louder by modern machinery. Platforms didn't invent the desire to be seen. They industrialized it. But the soul has always known the temptation. The Pharisee sounding the trumpet, the speaker seeking admiration, the giver wanting witness, the leader needing applause and approval, the writer wanting praise, the hiker wanting the story to prove something. Same hunger, different trail. Epictetus' question still stands. Would you be useful or be praised? Jesus' warning still stands. Don't do your alms to be seen. And the trail adds its own severe counsel. Don't walk to be admired. Walk for the deed. A clean deed can be shared. It doesn't have to be hidden forever. I'm writing about this hike now, which means the deed didn't remain invisible. But the question is whether it could survive invisibility. Would it still have mattered if no one ever read this? Would the lesson still have been worth learning if it never became a post? I believe the answer is yes. You see, the deed wasn't 30 miles. The deed was finding the truth. The deed was noticing motive. The deed was stopping under pressure. The deed was returning to base camp, laughing in a flooded tent, turning back when wisdom required it, letting 6 miles be enough. The deed was receiving the trail's honesty without complaint and walking for formation, not performance. You see, that's the way to step off of the validation treadmill. Not by pretending we don't enjoy praise, not by becoming indifferent to encouragement, not by refusing to share anything meaningful, not by despising recognition when it comes, but by purifying the motive before the deed is done. By asking, would I still do this if no one praised it? Would I still serve if no one noticed? Would I still write if no one applauded? Would I still walk if no one knew? Would I still choose widely if wisdom looked like failure? You see, it's true. The trail doesn't validate your parking or your ego. It only asks what you're carrying. And if you listen carefully, it may help you lay some of it down. Here's our internal practice, the clean deed. Our focus is when the hunger for applause rises, return to motive. Now remember, before you enter base camp, we do shamatha. Stop, calm, rest, and heal. So we stop first. Just like I did on the trail, we sit down or we stand still. You put the phone away and out of sight. You begin at the top of your head. You feel the muscles of your head relax and release. Next, relax the brow. Move your attention to relax the jaw, the shoulders, down to the arms. And you let the hands soften and feel the tension flow down through your fingertips. And you say quietly, I've arrived. I don't need this deed to prove my worth. Next we calm. We take 5 slow breaths. Breathing in, I am calm. Breathing out, I am restful. Breathing in, I am calm. Breathing out, I am restful. Calm. Restful. For 5 slow breaths. Next, we rest. Let the breath become natural, in a natural rhythm. Notice the desire to be seen and praised, admired, thanked, quoted, liked, recognized, or approved. Don't shame it. It's human. Simply name it. That is a validation hunger. And we can heal. We place a hand on our chest or your belly, and we breathe in long, and we offer one honest sentence on the out-breath. I can do the deed without making applause its wage. You might breathe that a few times to truly heal. Finally, we enter into reflection. Choose one deed before doing it. It may be writing, serving, performing, giving, posting on social media, teaching, leading, helping, correcting, apologizing, hiking, parenting, or creating. Whatever it is, you name it. Ask the question, why am I doing this? Would I still do it if no one praised it? Would I do it differently if no one could see it? Am I seeking to be useful or to be admired? Is this deed still clean? Then offer one small action. Choose one action this week that can survive invisibility. Give without telling. Serve without reporting. Write without checking the metrics. Do the right thing without explaining yourself. Let someone else receive the credit. Delay checking whether anyone noticed. Complete one faithful act just for the deed itself. Our trail marker for this week. This week, When I feel the hunger for applause, I'll return to base camp and remember this. A clean deed can be shared, but it must be able to survive invisibility. All right, for the next post. The Sipsey Trail didn't only expose my hunger for applause, it also began pointing toward a second and more deep hunger, the craving for more, the hedonic treadmill. More proof, more comfort, more status, more evidence that I'm still enough. The first treadmill, the validation treadmill, asks, who saw me? The second treadmill, the hedonic treadmill, asks, what lack I yet? Now that question can be holy when it leads inward toward freedom, but it becomes dangerous when comparison answers for us. What lack I yet to keep up? What lack I yet to stay ahead? What lack I yet to feel secure, superior, admired, or complete? That's where the next post will go. From the hunger to be praised to the hunger to possess enough that comparison finally goes silent. It never does. The hedonic treadmill keeps moving until base camp learns the harder question. Not what do I still need before I can be at peace, but what do I need to release? Hey, thank you for listening to Greybeard Philosophy. And now if this episode helped you to pause, examine your motive, or return to base camp, consider sharing with someone who may need the same question on their trail. You can send the episode to a friend or share it on social media with a simple trail marker. What am I doing for the deed, and what am I doing for the witness? Sometimes a shared reflection becomes a quiet guide for someone else's moment of choice. Until next time, be kind to yourself. Walk for the deed and not the witness, and learn something for the next trek.